Right now, in the stillness between your thoughts, you're surrounded by sound, even if you don't notice it, especially if you don't notice it. Sound is everywhere. The soft hum of a device charging somewhere in the room, the distant murmur of traffic beyond your window, muffled by walls and glass, the settling of a house at night, wood and metal adjusting to the cooling air, creaking in a language older than words, your own breath moving in and out, a rhythm so familiar you've forgotten it's there. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you can hear your heartbeat, not with your ears exactly, but with something deeper, a pulse in your temples, a quiet thrum in your chest, sound made internal, private, yours alone. But what if all of that stopped? Not muted, like pressing your palms against your ears, not softened, like stepping into a padded room, but truly utterly stopped. Not quieter, impossible. What if you entered a place where sound couldn't exist at all? Where no matter how hard you screamed, how loudly you clapped, how violently something shattered, there would be nothing. No echo, no vibration, no whisper carried on invisible waves. This isn't a thought experiment. This place is real. It's called space. And right now, as you lie here, wherever you are, in whatever corner of the world you've chosen to rest tonight, I want you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Feel the weight of your blankets, the coolness of the pillow against your cheek, the way your body sinks into the mattress, held by gravity, anchored to this spinning rock we call home. You're safe here, warm, surrounded by air, an ocean of invisible molecules pressing gently against your skin, filling your lungs, carrying every sound from the world to your ears. But just beyond that thin blue shell of atmosphere, beyond the clouds and the auroras and the satellites spinning silently in orbit, there is a boundary. And on the other side of that boundary, the rules change. Sound, as you know it, ceases to exist. Astronauts have tried to describe it. Some call it peaceful, others say it's unnerving. A few admit it's the closest thing to true nothingness they've ever experienced. One astronaut, years after returning to Earth, said he still dreams of that silence. Not as a nightmare, but as a memory of something vast and incomprehensible. A silence so complete it felt like being erased. But here's the paradox. The thing that makes this mystery so beautiful and so strange. Space isn't quiet because nothing is happening. It's quiet despite everything that's happening. Right now, billions of miles away, stars are exploding. Not the slow, gentle fading we imagine, but violent, catastrophic detonations that release more energy in a single second than our sun will produce in its entire 10 billion year life. Shockwaves ripple outward, tearing through dust and gas, slamming into neighboring stars, triggering chain reactions that light up entire galaxies. And yet, if you were there, floating in a spacesuit just a few thousand miles away, close enough to see the flash, to feel the radiation scorching your visor, you would hear nothing. Not a rumble, not a roar, not even a whisper. The explosion would happen in perfect, absolute silence. How can that be? How can the universe be so loud and so silent at the same time? That's the question we're going to explore tonight. Not with urgency, not with hurry, but slowly. Like a walk through a garden at dusk, where every step reveals something new, something you hadn't noticed before. We're going to unravel the mystery of sound in space, what it means, why it matters, and what it reveals about the universe, about life, about the strange and fragile conditions that allow us to hear anything at all. You don't need to do anything but listen. Let your body settle deeper into rest. Feel your breathing slow. Your thoughts begin to drift like clouds across a summer sky. You're not here to memorize facts or solve equations. You're here to wonder, to be curious, to let the mystery of silence wash over you like a tide, pulling you gently towards sleep. Because here's the truth. Most of us have never experienced real silence. Even in the quietest moments, a library at midnight, a forest after fresh snow, there's always something. The rustle of your clothing, the distant hum of electricity in the walls, the faint ringing in your ears that never quite goes away, a reminder of all the sounds that have passed through your life. But in space, there is nothing to hum, nothing to rustle, nothing to carry even the faintest vibration from one place to another. And that's not a flaw. It's not a mistake in the design of the cosmos. It's simply the way things are when you remove the one ingredient sound cannot live without, something to move through. On Earth, sound travels through air, through water, through the bones in your skull and the wood of a floor and the metal of a train track stretching across miles of landscape. It moves because molecules exist, tiny, invisible particles packed so densely that when one vibrates, it nudges its neighbor, which nudges the next, which nudges the next, creating a wave that spreads outward like ripples on a pond. But space is different. Space is almost perfectly empty. Not empty like an empty room, which is still full of air. Not empty like an empty jar, which is still surrounded by pressure. Empty in a way that's hard to comprehend. So empty that in some regions, you could travel a cubic meter and find fewer than one atom. One single particle, alone in the void, with nothing nearby to touch, to collide with, to pass a vibration to. And without that chain of contact, sound cannot exist. It's not that sound is muffled in space, or distant, or faint. It's that the very concept of sound, waves moving through a medium, has no meaning there. You could stand next to a spaceship engine firing at full thrust, metal screaming under stress, fuel igniting in controlled explosions, and you would hear nothing. Because there's no air to carry the vibration from the engine to your ear. The silence of space is not the absence of noise. It's the absence of the possibility of noise. And yet, if you were inside that spaceship, pressed against the hull, you would hear something, a deep thrumming vibration, the hum of machinery, the clank of tools against metal, because sound can still travel through solids, through the walls, through your helmet, through the bones of your skull directly into the fluid of your inner ear. So even in space, silence is complicated. Even in the void, there are exceptions. And that's what makes this so fascinating. Because the question, what happens to sound in space, doesn't have a simple answer. It opens into a maze of deeper questions. What is sound really? Is it the vibration itself or the experience of hearing it? If a star explodes and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? And what does it mean that the universe, this vast, violent, churning ocean of energy, conducts its most dramatic events in total silence? We're going to wander through those questions tonight. Not to find definitive answers, but to sit with the mystery, to let it change the way you think about the world around you, about the air you breathe, about the sounds you take for granted. Because once you understand what happens to sound in space, you start to realize how extraordinary it is that you can hear anything at all, that right now, in this moment, you live in a rare pocket of the universe where vibration can travel, where molecules are packed close enough to carry the tremor of a voice, the crash of a wave, the distant hum of a city at night. You are surrounded by sound, and that, against the backdrop of infinite silence, is a kind of miracle. So settle in. Let the blankets hold you. Let your breath slow to match the rhythm of the words. We're going to drift together, you and I, toward the edge of sound itself, toward the place where it ends. And in that ending, we'll find something beautiful, something quiet, something true. Imagine you're floating, not in water. There's no wetness here, no resistance, no current to push against. You're suspended in something closer to nothingness, weightless, untethered. There's no up or down, no sense of falling or rising, just stillness. Your body drifts slowly, turning in a lazy spiral you didn't initiate and can't control. Momentum, not gravity, guides you now. Around you, the universe unfolds in every direction. To your left, Earth hangs like a blue and white jewel against the black. Swirls of clouds stretch across oceans you can name, the Pacific, vast and unbroken, catching sunlight along its edges. You can see the curve of the planet, the thin halo of atmosphere clinging to its surface like breath on cold glass. That fragile shell, no thicker than the skin of an apple if Earth were apple-sized, is the only thing separating sound from silence. Everything you've ever heard, every voice, every song, every thunderclap has happened inside that delicate layer. Out here, beyond it, there is nothing to carry sound. To your right, the sun blazes, too bright to look at directly, even through your visor's filters. It's closer than you've ever seen it, and yet impossibly far. Light reaches you in just over 8 minutes. But if the sun made a sound, if it roared with the fury of its endless fusion, you would never hear it. The space between you and that burning star is too empty, too vast. Sound would die at the sun's surface, vibrations scattering into the void with nowhere to go. Behind you, stars, thousands of them, maybe millions, depending on how far you've drifted from Earth's light pollution. They don't twinkle out here, without an atmosphere to distort their light. They burn steady and cold, like pinpricks in black velvet. Some of those stars are exploding right now. Supernovas so violent they briefly outshine entire galaxies. Others are colliding, black holes devouring matter. Neutron stars spinning faster than your mind can comprehend, emitting jets of radiation that could sterilize a planet. And all of it happens in perfect silence, you turn your head. Or try to. Movement is strange here. Your body doesn't obey the same rules. On Earth, you turn your head and the world shifts. Here, you turn your head and you begin to spin. Slowly, unstoppably, until something stops you. Your hand brushes the side of your spacecraft. A gentle touch, and the contact travels through your glove, into your bones, into your ears. A soft thud, muffled, but real. That's the only sound you've heard in hours. Not the hiss of your oxygen regulator. That's too quiet, too much a part of you now to notice. Not the crackle of the radio, though it sits silent in your helmet, waiting for a signal from mission control that takes seconds to arrive and feels like forever. Just that single small thud, proof that sound hasn't vanished entirely. It's just conditional, limited, dependent on contact. You press your hand flat against the hull of the spacecraft. Through your glove, you can feel vibrations, machinery inside humming, life support systems cycling air and water, the faint tremor of a solar panel adjusting its angle to catch more sunlight. These vibrations travel through metal and fabric and bone, bypassing the need for air. Sound without sound, a ghost of the sensory world you left behind. But let your hand drift away from the hull. Just an inch, just a breath of distance, and the sensation stops. The vibration has nowhere to go. It dies in the gap. That inch of vacuum is an uncrossable ocean. Sound cannot leap it, cannot bridge it, cannot exist in the space between your hand and the ship. And so you float in silence again. Not the silence of a quiet room, where you can still hear the blood in your ears, the breath in your lungs. Not the silence of deep meditation, where sound fades but awareness remains. This is different. This is the silence of absence. The silence of a universe that doesn't need sound to function. That operates on principles, light, gravity, radiation, that have no relationship to vibration, to air, to the delicate machinery of an eardrum translating pressure waves into meaning. You close your eyes inside your helmet, and the darkness is the same as the darkness outside. But when you open them again, you're reminded you're not truly alone. Even in this silence, even in this void, there is motion. There is light. There is evidence of the universe's endless activity. A satellite drifts past, maybe 100 meters away. You see it clearly. Solar panels glinting, instruments pointing toward Earth, tracking weather or communications or the movement of ships across oceans. It's moving fast, kilometers per second, but from here it looks slow, graceful. It passes without a sound. No engine hum, no rush of air, just the silent ballet of orbit. Farther out, beyond the satellite, beyond the thin halo of human-made objects circling Earth, you can see the moon. Grey and pockmarked, ancient and unchanging. It has no atmosphere, no air, no medium for sound. If you were standing on its surface, you could watch a meteor slam into the ground just a few hundred meters away. Dust and rock exploding into the sky. A crater forming in an instant, and you would hear nothing. You would feel the impact maybe, a tremor through the ground, traveling through your boots into your body. But the air, if there were any, would carry no sound, because there is no air. And that's when it hits you, the strangeness of it all. The silence isn't empty. It's full of light, full of motion, full of energy and matter, and the invisible forces that shape galaxies and guide comets and pull planets into their endless loops around stars. But none of it makes a sound, not because the universe is peaceful, but because sound is an accident, a byproduct of density, of proximity, of molecules packed close enough to jostle one another, to pass along the message of a vibration like neighbors whispering secrets through thin walls. And out here, there are no neighbors. There are no walls, just distance, just emptiness, just the vast, indifferent silence of space. You think about Earth again, that blue marble shrinking behind you, small enough now to cover with your thumb. Down there right now, someone is laughing. A child is crying. A dog is barking at the wind. Waves are crashing against a shore. Thunder is rolling across a valley. A train is rattling over tracks. All of that sound, all of that noise, all of that vibration, it exists because of air. Because molecules of nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide are packed tightly enough, bouncing against one another trillions of times per second, creating the invisible medium that carries every sound from its source to someone's ear. But here, beyond the atmosphere, there is no such medium. There is only you, and the silence, and the knowledge that if you shouted, if you screamed with every ounce of breath in your lungs, the sound would die inside your helmet. It would bounce off the visor maybe, echo faintly in the small space between your mouth and the glass, but it would never leave. Never travel, never reach another soul. You are more alone than any human has ever been on Earth. And yet, strangely, it doesn't feel lonely, because the silence isn't hostile. It's not rejecting you, it's simply indifferent. The universe doesn't care whether you hear it or not. It continues vast and patient, spinning and burning and collapsing and creating, all without needing applause, without needing witness, without needing sound. And maybe that's the first lesson of space. That sound is not essential, it's optional, a luxury, a gift. But let go, drift away, break contact with the solid, and the sound vanishes. Because now there's a gap, a void, a space, literal space, where the vibration cannot leap. It dies at the boundary. The spacecraft might be roaring with activity, but if you're floating just a meter away, you hear nothing. The gap is uncrossable. Sound is not a thing that flies through emptiness. It's a wave that needs a medium, a substance, a pathway of molecules willing to carry it forward. And space, for all its vastness, for all its beauty, is almost entirely devoid of that pathway. Almost. Because here's the secret, the twist, the first glimpse of something deeper. Space isn't completely empty. It's just empty enough. There are molecules out there, hydrogen atoms mostly, scattered so thinly that they barely qualify as matter. In some regions of interstellar space, there's about 1 atom per cubic centimeter. In others, even fewer. For comparison, the air you're breathing right now contains about 30 billion molecules in that same cubic centimeter. 30 billion versus 1. That's the difference between sound and silence. That one lonely atom, drifting through the void, has no neighbors to bump into, no one to pass the vibration to. It could be trembling with energy, oscillating wildly, and it wouldn't matter. The message dies with it. There's no chain, no relay, no wave. And so, for all practical purposes, sound in space does not exist. But, and this is important, vibration still exists. Energy still moves. Things still collide, explode, resonate. It's just that, without a dense medium to carry those vibrations as sound waves, they transform into something else. Heat, light, radiation. The energy doesn't vanish. It just changes form, obeying the laws of thermodynamics, scattering into the universe in ways we can measure but not hear. A supernova doesn't go silent because it's quiet. It goes silent because there's no air to translate its violence into sound. The explosion still happens. The shockwave still ripples outward, slamming into dust clouds light years away, compressing gas, triggering new star formation. But the wave isn't acoustic anymore. It's kinetic. It's thermal. It's everything but sound. And maybe that's the first real understanding. Sound is not universal. It's local, specific, a product of certain conditions, density, proximity, matter. Remove those conditions, and sound doesn't just fade. It ceases to be possible. Space teaches us that sound is fragile, conditional, a miracle of circumstance. And yet, here you are, lying in a room filled with air, surrounded by sound, hearing these words, or imagining them, as they ripple through the molecules between the speaker and your ear, between the page and your mind, between silence and meaning. Sound is not a thing. It's a gift, and space, in its vast silence, reminds us of that. Sound is not a thing. It's an event. That might seem like a small distinction, but it changes everything. When you hear a door slam, you don't think of it as an event. You think of it as a sound, as if the sound itself were an object moving through the air. But it's not. What's moving is energy. What's traveling is motion. The door hits the frame, and that collision sends a shockwave rippling outward through the air, disturbing molecules, setting them in motion, creating a cascade of pressure that spreads like a stone dropped into still water. The sound is the wave. The hearing is what happens when that wave reaches you. But the wave needs something to move through. On Earth, that something is almost always air. When you speak, your vocal cords vibrate. Thin folds of tissue opening and closing hundreds of times per second, trembling with tension and breath. That vibration pushes against the air molecules sitting in your throat, in your mouth, just beyond your lips. Those molecules compress, squeeze together for a brief instant, then spring apart, pushing into the molecules next to them, which compress and spring apart in turn, and so on, creating a ripple that travels outward in all directions. It's not the same molecules that travel from your mouth to someone's ear. That's the illusion. The air itself doesn't rush forward like wind. Instead, Each molecule nudges its neighbor, and the neighbor nudges the next, passing the vibration along like a crowd doing the wave in a stadium. No single person moves far, but the motion travels across the entire crowd. That's how sound works. A relay, a chain, a transmission of energy through matter, and that's why it needs matter to exist. Think of it like this. Sound is a message, and air is the messenger. Without the messenger, the message has nowhere to go. It stays locked at the source, vibrating in place, going nowhere. In space, where there are so few molecules that you could fit all the air in a cubic kilometer of the vacuum into a small room on Earth, there's no one to pass the message to. The vibration begins and immediately dies. No relay, no chain, no wave, just silence. But here's where it gets strange. Sound doesn't need air specifically. It just needs something. Anything dense enough to carry the vibration. Water works beautifully. Whales sing across entire oceans, their low-frequency calls traveling thousands of miles through the deep. The water is dense, packed with molecules eager to pass the vibration along. Submarines use sonar for the same reason. Sound moves faster and farther underwater than it ever could in air. The medium is denser, more cooperative, more willing to carry the wave. Even solids work. Better, in fact. Sound travels through steel faster than through air, through diamond, faster still. If you press your ear to a train track, you can hear a train coming from miles away, long before the sound reaches you through the air. The metal conducts the vibration directly, efficiently, without the signal degrading as much as it would in the open atmosphere. This is why, even in space, astronauts can still hear things if they're touching something. Inside the spacecraft, vibrations from machinery travel through the walls, through the floors, into their bodies. They hear the hum of life support, not because there's air inside their helmets, though there is, but because the vibrations move through the structure of the ship itself, through their suits, through the bones of their skulls, arriving at their inner ears through solid contact, rather than airborne waves. Touch becomes hearing, connection becomes sound. But what is actually happening when sound moves through air? What's the invisible machinery that turns a vibration into something you can hear? Picture a single molecule of air, not the whole atmosphere, just one molecule, oxygen maybe, or nitrogen. It's impossibly small, far too tiny to see even with the most powerful microscope. And it's never still. Right now, in the air around you, every molecule is vibrating, bouncing, colliding with its neighbors at speeds you can't imagine. Hundreds of meters per second, zigzagging in random directions, smashing into other molecules billions of times every second. This chaos is constant. It's the baseline hum of matter at room temperature. The warmer the air, the faster the molecules move. The cooler, the slower. But they never stop. They are always in motion, always colliding, always transferring tiny amounts of energy back and forth in an endless, invisible dance. Now imagine something disrupts that dance. A hand claps, a string vibrates, a voice calls out. Suddenly, in one small region of space, the molecules are pushed together, compressed, squeezed into a smaller volume than they want to occupy. The pressure rises just slightly, just for an instant, and because molecules don't like being crowded, they push back. They spring apart, rebounding into the space around them, shoving into the next layer of molecules, which compress in turn, then spring apart, then compress again. This is the wave. Not a thing moving, but a pattern moving. A disturbance traveling through the medium like a ripple across a pond. The water doesn't travel from one side of the pond to the other. It just moves up and down. But the wave crosses the entire surface. Sound works the same way. The air molecules mostly stay in place, jiggling back and forth. But the pattern of compression and expansion, the wave, travels forward at about 343 meters per second at sea level. That's the speed of sound. Not fast compared to light, but fast enough that you don't usually notice the delay. When someone speaks to you across a room, the sound reaches you in a fraction of a second. Your brain interprets it as instantaneous, but it's not. The wave is crawling towards you, molecule by molecule, compression by compression, like a message passed hand to hand through a crowd. And here's the hidden mechanism, the part most people never think about. The wave is invisible, but it's not intangible. It's real, it's physical, it's pressure. When a sound wave reaches your ear, it pushes against your eardrum, a thin membrane stretched across the opening of your ear canal. The wave compresses the air just outside the drum, and the pressure pushes the membrane inward just slightly. Then the wave expands, the pressure drops, and the membrane springs back. Then compresses again, then expands, hundreds or thousands of times per second depending on the pitch of the sound. Your eardrum is vibrating, not by choice, but because the air is pushing it, pulling it, oscillating it in sync with the original vibration, the one that started at the source, maybe across the room, maybe miles away. And behind your eardrum, 3 tiny bones, the smallest bones in your body, are connected in a delicate chain. The hammer, the anvil, the stirrup. When the eardrum vibrates, it moves the hammer moves the anvil moves the stirrup, and the stirrup presses against a fluid-filled chamber deep inside your skull, setting the fluid in motion, creating waves inside the liquid, which brush against thousands of microscopic hair cells lining the chamber. Those hair cells bend, and when they bend, they fire electrical signals, nerve impulses, messages sent racing along the auditory nerve to your brain, where they are decoded, interpreted, transformed into meaning, into sound. So when you hear something, you're not actually hearing the vibration itself. You're hearing your brain's interpretation of the electrical signals generated by hair cells that were moved by fluid, that was moved by bones, that were moved by an eardrum, that was moved by air, that was moved by a distant vibration. It's a chain, a translation, a transformation of mechanical energy into electrical information. And every step of that chain requires a medium, requires matter, requires something to push, something to move, something to carry the wave forward. In space, the chain breaks at the very first link. There's no air to push, no molecules to compress. The vibration begins, but it has nowhere to go. The eardrum would never move because there's no pressure wave to move it. The bones would stay still. The fluid would remain calm. The hair cells would never bend. Silence, not because your ears stopped working, but because the mechanism itself, the entire process of sound, requires a medium that space simply doesn't provide. And yet, there's a strange exception, a loophole, a way for sound to exist in space, even without air, because vibrations can still travel through solids. If you were floating in space, untethered, and someone knocked on the hull of a nearby spacecraft, you wouldn't hear it. The vibration would die at the metal surface, unable to leap across the vacuum to reach you. But if you pressed your helmet against the hull, suddenly you would hear it. The vibration would travel through the metal, into your helmet, through the air inside the helmet, against your eardrum. The chain would be complete. The sound would exist again, not because the vacuum disappeared, but because you created a bridge, a pathway, a solid connection through which the wave could travel. Astronauts use this instinctively. They tap on each other's helmets when the radio fails. They press their bodies against the walls of the spacecraft to feel the vibrations of machinery, to listen for problems, to stay connected to the mechanical heartbeat of their vessel. Sound, in these moments, is intimate, personal. It requires touch, contact, closeness. And maybe that's the hidden truth. Sound is not just a wave, it's a connection, a thread that ties the source to the listener, mediated by the substance between them. On Earth, that substance is everywhere, invisible, abundant, taken for granted. You are always connected by air, always bathed in the medium that allows sound to reach you from all directions at once. But in space, connection is rare. You must choose it, reach for it, press against the world to hear it. And in the silence between those moments of contact, the universe reminds you, sound is not guaranteed, it's conditional, earned, precious. Humans have been listening to the universe for as long as we've existed. Long before we understood what sound was, before we knew about molecules and pressure waves and vibrations, we listened. We turned our ears toward the world and tried to make sense of what we heard. Thunder rolling across the plains. Was it the voice of gods? The roar of a predator in the darkness? Was it close enough to run? The whisper of wind through tall grass? Did it carry warnings or promises, or simply the breath of the earth itself? Sound was information. Sound was survival. Sound told you where the herd was moving, where the river flowed, where danger hid in the shadows. Ears were as important as eyes, maybe more so in the deep hours of night when firelight could only reach so far and the world beyond the flames was a mystery written in sound. And then, at some point, humans looked up. They saw the stars, distant, silent, cold, and wondered, do they make sound too? It's a natural question. Everything on Earth that moves seems to make noise. Rivers rush, wind howls, animals call. Even the stillness of the forest is full of tiny sounds. Leaves brushing, insects humming, the creak of branches settling under their own weight. So why wouldn't the heavens, which clearly moved across the sky night after night, also sing. The ancient Greeks believed they did. Pythagoras, the mathematician and mystic, proposed the idea of the music of the spheres. He taught that the planets and stars moved through the heavens in perfect mathematical harmony, each one producing a tone as it travelled. The universe, he said, was a symphony, a cosmic orchestra playing a song so constant, so ever-present, that humans had grown deaf to it. We couldn't hear it, not because it wasn't there, but because we had never known silence. We were born into the music and could no longer distinguish it from the background of existence. It's a beautiful idea, poetic, almost true. For centuries, people believed it, or wanted to believe it. The notion that the cosmos was musical, that the movement of celestial bodies produced harmony, fit perfectly with the view that the universe was ordered, intentional, divine. If mathematics governed the stars and music was mathematical, then the stars must make music. It was logical, elegant, comforting, but it was wrong. Not because the universe is chaotic, it's not. And not because the stars don't move. They do, constantly, violently, at speeds that would tear anything we know apart. But because between us and them, there is nothing. No air to carry the vibration, no medium to translate motion into sound. The music of the spheres doesn't exist, not in the way Pythagoras imagined. And yet, in a strange way, he wasn't entirely wrong. You would hear the supernova, not as it truly sounded, no human could survive that, but as a distant muffled rumble, a bass note so deep it would shake your bones, a reminder that sound doesn't need much, just enough, just barely enough substance to carry the wave. And that's the paradox. Space is silent, yes, but it's not uniformly silent. There are pockets, nebulae, planetary atmospheres, the thin plasma surrounding stars, where sound can exist, at least in theory, where the density is just high enough for vibrations to propagate, to travel, to become waves. Even Earth's upper atmosphere, where the International Space Station orbits, is technically still space. The air there is so thin it might as well be vacuum by our standards. You couldn't breathe it. You couldn't hear anything through it with unprotected ears. But it's not nothing. And if you had sensitive enough instruments, you could detect sound waves traveling through it. Extremely faint, extremely distorted, but real. In fact, the station itself experiences this. When solar storms hit, charged particles slam into the thin remnants of atmosphere at orbital altitude. They create vibrations, tiny pressure variations. The station's hull picks them up, translates them into mechanical vibrations that astronauts can sometimes feel, if not quite hear. A low hum, a tremor, the ghost of sound in a place we call silent. And then there's the strangest paradox of all. Inside your body, sound never stops, even in the vacuum of space. Even floating untethered in the absolute silence between stars, you would still hear things. Your heartbeat, loud and steady, transmitted through the bones of your chest into your inner ear. The rush of blood through vessels near your eardrums. The creaking of your jaw as you clench your teeth. The subtle sounds of digestion, respiration, the mechanical processes of a living body. These sounds require no external air. They travel through you, through flesh and bone and fluid. Your body is its own medium, a self-contained world of sound in the midst of cosmic silence. And if you spoke, if you opened your mouth inside your helmet and said a word, you would hear it. Not loudly, not clearly, but the air inside your helmet would carry the vibration from your vocal cords to your ears. A tiny pocket of sound, no bigger than your head, preserved inside a bubble of atmosphere while the universe outside remains silent. So the paradox is this. Sound exists and doesn't exist in space, depending on where you draw the line. Depending on what you count as space and what you count as substance. Depending on whether you're asking about the vacuum between stars or the thin halos around them. The silence between spacecraft or the vibrations within them. The universe is silent, except when it's not. And maybe that's the deeper truth, that sound is always conditional, always dependent, always a negotiation between vibration and medium, between energy and matter, between the source and the listener. Space doesn't erase sound. It just makes it rare, localized, precious. And in doing so, it teaches us something profound. Sound is not a given. It's an exception, a pocket of possibility in an ocean of silence. And we live inside one of those pockets. Here's where it gets strange. Where the simple answer, there's no sound in space because there's no air, starts to feel incomplete. Because the universe doesn't seem to care about our definitions. Consider this. Right now, at this very moment, the sun is screaming, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The surface of the sun is in constant violent motion. Superheated plasma churns and roils, rising from the core, cooling, sinking back down in massive convection currents. Solar flares erupt, explosions so powerful they release the energy of millions of nuclear bombs in a matter of minutes. Coronal mass ejections hurl billions of tons of charged particles into space at speeds approaching 1,000 kilometers per second. If this were happening on Earth, the sound would be unimaginable. Deafening doesn't begin to describe it. The roar would obliterate continents. The shockwave would shatter mountains. Every solar flare would produce a thunderclap louder than every explosion in human history combined. But we hear nothing. Not because the violence isn't real. Not because the energy isn't there. But because between us and the sun, there are 150 million kilometers of near-perfect vacuum. The vibrations are born, ripple outward through the sun's atmosphere, and then stop, die, dissipate into forms of energy that don't require air. The heat reaches us. The light reaches us. The radiation reaches us. But the sound, the acoustic wave, the pressure variation that our ears could interpret, never makes it past the sun's thin outer atmosphere. The sun is screaming in silence, and it's not alone. Across the universe, the most catastrophic events imaginable unfold without a whisper. Stars explode in supernovas, releasing more energy in a few seconds than our sun will produce in its entire 10 billion year lifespan. Neutron stars collide, creating gravitational waves that ripple through the fabric of space-time itself. Black holes devour entire solar systems, shredding planets and moons into streams of superheated matter, spiraling down into oblivion. And all of it happens in total, absolute silence. But here's the paradox. If you were there, if you could somehow survive close enough to witness these events, you might hear something after all. Not through the vacuum. That's still impossible, but through indirect means. Through the things these events affect. Imagine you're in a spacecraft near a supernova. Absurdly dangerous, but bear with me. The supernova explodes. Instantly, you're bathed in light, radiation, heat, electromagnetic waves across every frequency. And then, minutes or hours later, depending on how far you are, something else arrives. Matter, the shockwave of the explosion, traveling slower than light but still at tremendous speed, slams into clouds of dust and gas. Those clouds are thin, far thinner than Earth's atmosphere. But they're not a perfect vacuum. There's substance there, particles, and when the shockwave hits them, they compress. They vibrate. They create pressure waves. Sound waves, not in the vacuum between you and the supernova, but in the medium of the nebula itself. And if your spacecraft happened to be passing through that nebula, if your hull were in contact with that tenuous cloud of gas, you would feel it. The vibrations would travel through the particles, into your ship, through the walls, into your ears. Because the universe does hum. It does vibrate. It does produce patterns and rhythms and oscillations that if we had the right instruments, if we could translate them into frequencies our ears could perceive, would sound like music, just not through air. Modern scientists have found ways to listen to space, not with ears, but with instruments that detect electromagnetic waves, plasma oscillations, charged particles spiraling through magnetic fields. These are vibrations, real, measurable, physical, but they exist in forms that don't require air. They travel through the fabric of space itself, through magnetic fields, through the thin soup of particles that makes up the solar wind. And when we convert those vibrations into audio, when we take the data and translate it into sound waves that human ears can process, the universe reveals itself as anything but silent. Jupiter's magnetosphere produces low, haunting tones, like whale song mixed with the hum of distant machinery. The sun emits a roar of radio waves, a constant crackling static that sounds like fire or rain or the hiss of an old television tuned to a dead channel. Pulsars, rapidly spinning neutron stars, send out regular pulses of radiation that, when converted to sound, become rhythmic beeps, like cosmic metronomes keeping time across the void. Even black holes, which consume everything, including light, produce vibrations. In 2003, astronomers discovered that a supermassive black hole in the Perseus galaxy cluster was emitting pressure waves into the surrounding gas. Actual sound waves, the lowest note ever detected in the universe. The pitch was B-flat, 57 octaves below middle C, far, far too low for human ears to hear, but real, measurable, a sound wave traveling through a medium so thin we would call it a vacuum, but dense enough, just barely, to carry the vibration across millions of light years. So Pythagoras was right, in a sense. The heavens do produce tones. They do vibrate, they do move in patterns that, if we could hear them, would be music. But they're not music made for us. They're not music we can hear without translation, without instruments, without the act of capturing something invisible and making it audible. And that tells us something important about sound and about ourselves. Sound, as we experience it, is a deeply human thing. It's biological, evolutionary. We developed ears not to appreciate symphonies, but to survive, to detect predators, to locate prey, to communicate across distances when sight failed. Our hearing is tuned to the frequencies that matter for survival on Earth. The rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch, the tone of a voice. We hear between roughly 20 and 20,000 vibrations per second, a narrow sliver of the spectrum of possible vibrations. Below that range, infrasound, are the rumbles of earthquakes, the songs of whales, the hum of distant storms. We can't hear them, but we sometimes feel them. A pressure in the chest, an unease we can't name. Above that range, ultrasound, are the calls of bats, the clicks of dolphins, the high-frequency pulses used in medical imaging. Silent to us, but rich with information for creatures built to perceive them. And beyond both, in frequencies our bodies can't process at all, the universe vibrates endlessly. Gamma rays, X-rays, microwaves, radio waves, all of them oscillations, all of them waves, all of them carrying energy and information across the cosmos. But none of them are sound in the human sense. Because sound is not just vibration. It's vibration we can hear. It's the experience of the wave, not just the existence of it. And that experience requires a medium and an ear and a mind to interpret the signal. Space has the vibrations. It lacks the medium and the listener. And so the ancient question remains, transformed but unresolved. If the universe vibrates and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Or is sound, in the end, something that only happens in the presence of life? Silence is older than sound, older than air, older than planets, older than stars themselves. In the beginning, if there was a beginning, there was no medium for sound to travel through. The universe was too hot, too dense, energy and matter swirling together in a state that defies imagination. And then, as it expanded and cooled, for a brief period, sound became possible. About 380,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe had cooled enough for atoms to form, hydrogen mostly, and for a window of time, maybe a few 100,000 years, the universe was filled with a primordial plasma dense enough to carry sound waves. Vibrations rippled through this cosmic fog, pressure waves oscillating across space, creating patterns that scientists can still detect today, frozen into the structure of the cosmic microwave background radiation. The universe rang like a bell, a deep, resonant tone, far too low for any ear to hear, but mathematically real, physically present, the echo of creation itself, propagating through matter that hadn't yet collapsed into galaxies or stars or anything we would recognize. And then the universe expanded further. The density dropped, the atoms spread apart, and the sound stopped. Not because the vibrations ceased, but because the medium became too thin to carry them. The universe returned to silence, a silence it has mostly maintained for 13.8 billion years since. Space became what it is now, a vast, empty cathedral where light travels freely but sound cannot. Yet in this silence, pockets of noise began to form. Gravity pulled matter together. Gas clouds collapsed. Stars ignited. And around some of those stars, planets formed, small islands of density in the emptiness, some with atmospheres thick enough to carry sound again. Earth, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Titan, each one a pocket where sound could exist, where the ancient possibility of acoustic waves returned, localized, fragile, temporary. We live in one of those pockets, a thin shell of air wrapped around a rock, spinning through the void. And inside that shell, sound thrives. It fills every corner, every moment. It has become so omnipresent that we forget how rare it is. How improbable, but step back, widen the lens, look at the universe as a whole, and the truth becomes clear. Sound is the exception, not the rule. Most of the universe is silent. Not quiet, silent. The space between galaxies, the space between stars, even the space between planets, it's all too empty for sound to exist. If you could somehow perceive the entire cosmos at once, you would find that sound occupies less than a fraction of a percent of existence. Tiny bubbles of atmosphere around tiny worlds, scattered across a void so vast that distances lose meaning. And yet, within those bubbles, sound shapes everything. On Earth, it shaped evolution. Creatures developed ears, and those ears changed the course of life. Predators learned to hunt by sound. Prey learned to freeze at the snap of a twig. Communication became possible. Calls, songs, warnings, language. Entire ecosystems structured themselves around acoustic signals. Bats navigate by echolocation. Whales coordinate across oceans through song. Humans built civilizations on the foundation of spoken words. Sound made us who we are. But it's a local phenomenon, a planetary quirk. Remove the atmosphere, and every strategy built on sound collapses. Every song becomes meaningless. Every word unspoken. The entire architecture of auditory life, millions of years of evolution, depends on a medium that exists only in the thinnest possible layer on the surface of certain worlds. And those worlds are rare, vanishingly rare. In our solar system, only a handful of places have atmospheres thick enough to support sound. Earth, obviously. Venus, though its atmosphere is so dense and hot that sound would behave strangely, traveling faster, carrying farther, but heard by no one. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, has a thick nitrogen atmosphere, thicker than Earth's. Actually, but the temperature is so cold that sound would move sluggishly, and the only listener is a robotic probe that can't truly hear. Mars has an atmosphere, but it's so thin, less than 1% the density of Earth's, that sound barely exists there. When NASA's Perseverance rover recorded the first audio on Mars, the sounds were faint, muffled, eerie. The crack of a laser vaporizing rock, the whir of the rover's wheels, the hum of rotor blades on the Ingenuity helicopter, all of it softer than it would be on Earth, absorbed quickly by the thin air, disappearing into the Martian silence within meters, and beyond Mars, beyond the rocky planets. The gas giants have no solid surface, just endless atmosphere descending into crushing pressure and heat. Sound exists there, technically, pressure waves traveling through hydrogen and helium, but it's a sound no one will ever hear. No ear, no microphone, just vibrations propagating through a poisonous, lethal soup of gas. And then, past the planets, there's nothing again, just the void, the Kuiper belt, the Oort cloud, interstellar space, intergalactic space, billions upon billions of cubic light years where sound is not just absent, it's impossible. And yet, the universe is not still. It vibrates in other ways. Gravitational waves ripple through space-time itself, produced by colliding black holes, merging neutron stars, the violent convulsions of space-time under extreme conditions. These waves were predicted by Einstein, detected for the first time in 2015, and they are, in a sense, the universe's true music. Not acoustic, not sound, but oscillations nonetheless, ripples in the fabric of reality, traveling at the speed of light, carrying information about the most energetic events in existence. If you could hear gravitational waves, if your ear could detect the stretching and compressing of space-time, the universe would be full of sound. Every binary star system would hum, every black hole would sing, every galaxy would emit a low, constant drone as its billions of stars orbit the galactic center, but we can't hear them, not directly. Our ears are tuned to air pressure, not space-time curvature, and so from our perspective, the universe remains mostly silent. We are sound beings, living on a sound world, floating through a soundless cosmos, and perhaps that's the wider mirror, the larger truth reflected in the silence of space. Sound is not a universal language. It's a local dialect, spoken only in the rare places where conditions allow. It's a reminder that our experience of reality is narrow, specific, shaped by the particular circumstances of our world. We evolved to hear because we live in air. If we had evolved on a world without atmosphere, impossible. But imagine, we would never have developed ears. We would navigate by light, by touch, by chemical signals, by senses we can't even imagine. And the concept of sound would be as alien to us as echolocation is to a human born deaf. Sound is not fundamental, it's contingent. And space, in its vast silence, holds up a mirror and whispers, "The universe is bigger than the senses you were given." there are truths you cannot hear. There's a loneliness to silence that we don't often talk about. Not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday morning, or the peace of a forest at dawn, but the kind of silence that reminds you how small you are, how far you are from anything that might hear you if you called out. Astronauts describe it in different ways, but there's a common thread, a feeling that creeps in during a spacewalk, or when they're alone in a module while the rest of the crew sleeps. It's not fear exactly, not panic, but a kind of existential weight, the sudden visceral understanding that beyond the thin walls of their spacecraft, beyond the fragile bubble of their suit, there is nothing. No air, no sound, no way for their voice to travel. If something went wrong, if the radio failed, if they drifted too far, if the tether snapped, they could scream and no one would hear. Not because their crew didn't care, but because the medium doesn't exist. The scream would die in their helmet, unheard, absorbed by the padding and glass, never reaching another soul. That's a different kind of silence, not peaceful, not restful, absolute, and it changes you. One astronaut, years after returning to Earth, said he still wakes up sometimes in the middle of the night, disoriented, listening to the sounds around him, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house settling, distant traffic, and feels overwhelmed. Not annoyed, overwhelmed, because for months those sounds didn't exist, and their absence made him realize how much he relied on them, not just for information, but for comfort, for proof that the world was alive, that he wasn't alone. Sound is connection. Even when we're not paying attention to it, even when it's just background noise, it ties us to the world around us. The murmur of conversation in another room, the bark of a dog down the street, the rain against the window. These sounds are small, unremarkable, but they weave a web of presence, a reminder that life is happening, that you are part of something larger than yourself, and in space, that web is cut. You are alone in a way that no human on Earth can truly understand. Not isolated, astronauts are rarely out of contact with mission control, with their crew, but separated, severed from the auditory fabric of a living world. And maybe that's why, when they return, so many of them speak about Earth with a kind of reverence. Not just for its beauty, the blue and white swirl of clouds, the greens and browns of continents, but for its noise, for the sound of wind and waves and birds, for the hum of cities, the chatter of crowds, the music spilling from open windows. All of that sound, annoying, intrusive, constant, is life. And it only exists because we have air, because we have a planet wrapped in a blanket of atmosphere thick enough to carry vibrations from one person to another, from one place to another, across distances we take for granted. On Earth, you are always connected by sound. Even if you're alone in a room, the world outside reaches you. A siren in the distance, a plane overhead, the rustling of leaves in the wind. You don't have to see these things to know they're there. The sound tells you. The sound holds you in the web. That hum from your laptop, its vibrations from a spinning fan, creating pressure waves in the air around it, waves that travel outward at 343 meters per second until they reach your eardrum and set it trembling in sync. The car passing outside, its engine's vibrations, transmitted through the body of the vehicle into the air, riding the wind until they slip through your closed window and arrive, faint but present in the space around you. Sound is always traveling, always moving. As long as there's air, as long as there's something to disturb it, sound propagates outward in every direction, spreading like light from a candle. Weaker the farther it goes, but never truly stopping until it's absorbed by walls, by distance, by the countless collisions that eventually turn acoustic energy into heat. But in space, none of this happens. The laptop would still hum, its fan would still spin, but the sound would die at the casing. The car would still drive, its engine would still fire, but the vibrations would remain trapped in the metal, unable to leap the gap between the vehicle and your ear. Everything would still move, still vibrate, but the chain would be broken. The relay would fail. The sound would be stillborn. And that means every sound you hear, every single one, no matter how mundane, is evidence of something extraordinary. Evidence that you exist in a place where the conditions for sound are met, where air is dense enough, where molecules are close enough, where the medium exists to carry vibrations from source to listener. Think about rain. You know what it sounds like, don't you? The patter against a roof, the hiss against pavement, the steady drumming that fills the air during a storm. It's one of the most common sounds on Earth, unremarkable in its familiarity. But stop and consider what's actually happening. Each raindrop is a tiny collision, water meeting solid ground, or metal or glass. The impact creates a vibration, a brief, sharp disturbance in the surface, and that disturbance pushes against the air, creating a pressure wave. Millions of raindrops, millions of tiny waves, all overlapping, interfering, combining into the complex sound we call rain. On the moon, rain would be silent. If water somehow existed there in liquid form, impossible but imagine, and fell from the sky, each drop would hit the surface without a whisper. You would see the splashes, you would feel the impacts if they hit you, but you wouldn't hear them. The vibrations would have nowhere to go, nowhere to carry them. Just the dead silence of a waterless, airless world. Or think about music. A guitar string vibrates when plucked, but the string alone makes almost no sound. It's too thin, too small to push much air. What makes a guitar audible is the body of the instrument, the hollow wooden chamber that amplifies the vibration, pushing large volumes of air in sync with the string, creating powerful pressure waves that fill a room. In space, you could pluck a guitar string and watch it vibrate, watch it blur with motion but hear nothing. Even if you pressed your ear directly against the body of the guitar, the sound would be faint, muffled, traveling only through the solid contact between the wood and your skull. The richness, the resonance, the fullness of the sound, all of that requires air, requires a medium to carry the complexity of the vibration from the instrument into the space around it. Sound, in other words, is never just about the source. It's always about the space between the medium, the substance that allows the vibration to travel, to spread, to reach a listener. And on Earth, that substance is everywhere. You swim through it without noticing. It presses against your skin with the weight of an entire atmosphere. Kilograms of force per square centimeter, and you don't feel it because you've never known anything else. You were born into it. You've lived your entire life submerged in this ocean of air, and it's as invisible to you as water is to a fish. But it's there, always there, carrying every sound that reaches you, every word spoken, every note played, every whisper of wind through leaves. And beyond the atmosphere, just a few hundred kilometers up, barely farther than a long drive, all of that stops. The ocean ends, the medium disappears, and sound becomes impossible. That's the everyday wonder of it. Sound is not a universal feature of existence. It's a local phenomenon, dependent on specific conditions that most of the universe doesn't provide. And yet for you, for everyone on Earth, it's so constant, so reliable, that you forget how rare it is. You forget that every conversation you've ever had, every song you've ever heard, every moment of listening, all of it has happened inside a thin bubble of atmosphere wrapped around a single planet, floating through an otherwise silent cosmos. The universe doesn't need sound to function. Stars burn without it, planets orbit without it, galaxies collide without it. But life, at least the kind of life we know, depends on it, uses it, thrives because of it. And that makes every sound you hear, no matter how small, a reminder. A reminder that you live in an extraordinary place, a place where the air exists, where density is high enough, where the conditions allow vibrations to travel from one being to another, carrying information, emotion, meaning. You are surrounded by sound right now, and it exists only because you are here, on this world, in this moment, in this rare pocket of the universe where sound is possible. Not everywhere, just here, and that, somehow, makes it sacred. And that relationship, in the vastness of the cosmos, is rare. There's a loneliness to that realization, not a sad loneliness, but a philosophical one. The universe is full of events, violent, energetic, dramatic, and almost none of them are heard. Almost none of them connect with a consciousness capable of perceiving them as sound. Stars explode in silence. Black holes collide in silence. Entire galaxies merge over millions of years, and no ear anywhere hears it happen. Does that make those events less real? Less significant? Or does it just mean that sound, as we understand it, is a human concern? A biological quirk? A way that certain organisms on certain planets have evolved to navigate their environments? Perhaps sound is not a universal property of the cosmos, but a local invention, a tool, a sense, one of many ways that life can interpret the vibrations of the universe, but not the only way, and certainly not a privileged way. We think of sound as fundamental because it's fundamental to us, but the universe doesn't care about our senses. It doesn't organize itself around what we can perceive. The vast majority of reality unfolds in frequencies we can't detect, in dimensions we can't access, in ways we can't begin to imagine. Sound is just the narrow slice of vibrations we happen to be able to hear. And even that slice is arbitrary, shaped by evolution, by the particular conditions of Earth, by the specific challenges our ancestors faced. If we had evolved on a planet with a thicker atmosphere, we might hear lower frequencies. If we had evolved underwater, we might hear higher ones. If we had evolved without air at all, impossible. But imagine, we might have no concept of sound whatsoever. And yet, sound feels so real to us, so immediate, so undeniable. It shapes how we think, how we communicate, how we understand the world. Language is built on it. Music is built on it. Culture, history, memory, all of it intertwined with the sounds we've heard and the sounds we've made. So maybe the philosophical drift leads here. Sound is real, but it's not universal. It's a perspective, a way of experiencing vibrations that only makes sense under certain conditions, in certain contexts, with certain senses. Space reminds us of that. It strips away the medium and forces us to confront the fact that sound is not a given. It's a gift, an accident of evolution and environment, a temporary phenomenon in a universe that has no need for it. And in that realization, there's both humility and wonder. Humility, because it reminds us how small our perspective is. How much of the universe operates beyond our senses, beyond our understanding. We are not the measure of all things. We are just one form of awareness, in one small pocket of space, hearing one narrow band of vibrations in a cosmos that vibrates at every frequency imaginable. But wonder too, because despite all that, despite the vastness, despite the silence, despite the improbability, we do hear. We do experience sound. We do live in a place where vibrations can travel, where communication is possible, where the universe can speak to us in a language we understand, even if that language is local, even if it's rare, even if it only exists here, in this thin shell of air, on this small planet. For this brief moment in cosmic time, we hear, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Because sound, in the end, is not about whether the universe makes noise. It's about whether we're listening. And we are, right now, in this moment, listening to the silence that surrounds us, and hearing, in that silence, something profound. The universe is still out there, spinning in the dark. Stars still burn. Planets still orbit. Solar winds still stream across millions of miles, carrying charged particles that will never make a sound. The silence continues, vast and patient, as it has for billions of years, as it will for billions more. And here you are, lying in the quiet, wrapped in blankets, breathing air that carries every small sound to your ears, the hum of the world around you, the soft rhythm of your own heartbeat, the gentle whisper of breath moving in and out, a tide that never stops, a conversation between your body and the atmosphere that has sustained every human who has ever lived. You are so small against the backdrop of all that silence, but you are not separate from it. You are part of the same universe that spins soundlessly through the void, made of the same atoms, governed by the same laws, a brief arrangement of matter that learned somehow to listen, to interpret vibrations, to find meaning in the movement of molecules. That's what you are, really. A listening thing, a creature built to detect the trembling of air, to decode it, to respond to it. Your ears are not accidents. They are tools shaped by millions of years of survival on a planet where sound mattered, where the rustle of a predator in tall grass meant life or death, where the call of a companion across the distance meant you were not alone. And even now, even in this age of screens and silence, your ears are still working, still translating the invisible motion of air into something your mind can understand, still connecting you to the world in ways you don't consciously notice but would miss terribly if they were gone. You've traveled far tonight, in your mind at least. From your room to the edge of space, from the familiar sounds of Earth to the absolute silence beyond the atmosphere, from the everyday wonder of a door closing to the philosophical question of whether sound even exists without someone to hear it. And maybe, along the way, something has shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gently, like the way light changes as the sun sets, so gradually you don't notice until you look up and realize the world has transformed. Maybe you hear things differently now. Maybe the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the creak of your house settling. Maybe those aren't just background noise anymore. Maybe they're proof, evidence, small miracles of physics and biology and the extraordinary accident of living on a planet wrapped in air. Because you understand now, In a way you didn't before, that sound is fragile, conditional, that it requires so many things to align. Density, proximity, a medium, an ear, a brain capable of interpretation, and that most of the universe doesn't meet those conditions. Most of existence is silent, empty, vibrating in frequencies we'll never perceive, in ways we'll never understand. But here, in this small pocket of space, sound is possible. It's abundant. It surrounds you every moment of every day, carrying information and emotion and connection from one being to another. And that makes it sacred, not in a religious sense, necessarily, but in the sense that something rare and improbable and beautiful deserves to be noticed, deserves to be honored, if only by paying attention, by listening, really listening, to the world that speaks to you in pressure waves and vibrations. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? It's an old question, a tired question maybe, the kind of thing that gets tossed around in late-night dorm room conversations, dismissed as semantic wordplay, as philosophy for philosophy's sake. But out here, metaphorically floating in the silence of space, thinking about what sound is and isn't, the question takes on new weight, because the answer, it turns out, depends entirely on what you mean by sound. If sound is the physical event, the vibration, the pressure wave moving through air, then yes, the tree makes a sound whether anyone hears it or not. The molecules don't care if an ear is present. They compress and expand according to the laws of physics, indifferent to observation. The wave exists. The event happens. Sound, in this definition, is objective, real, independent of consciousness. But if sound is the experience, the sensation of hearing, the neural firing, the interpretation of pressure waves by a brain, then no, without an ear, without a nervous system to decode the vibration into perception, there is no sound. There is only motion, only physics. The tree falls, the air moves, but nothing hears it. And without hearing, can we really call it sound? Space sharpens this question, because in space, even the physical event, the vibration, the wave, cannot exist. Not in the traditional sense. The tree could fall. It could slam into the ground with tremendous force. But without air, there's no medium for the wave to propagate through. The impact creates vibrations in the tree itself, in the ground, maybe even in the thin wisps of particles scattered through the near vacuum. But those vibrations don't travel far. They don't become waves. They don't become sound in any meaningful sense. So the question transforms. If a star explodes and no one is there to hear it, and there's no medium to carry the sound anyway, does it make a sound? The answer, strangely, is both yes and no. No in the acoustic sense. No pressure waves. No sound as we understand it. Just light and radiation and shock waves of matter moving through the void. But yes, in a deeper sense, because the explosion still vibrates, still oscillates, still creates patterns and waves, just not the kind our ears were designed to detect. Electromagnetic waves, gravitational waves, plasma oscillations. These are all vibrations, all periodic disturbances propagating through space. And if we define sound broadly enough, as any oscillation, any wave, any rhythmic disturbance, then the universe is full of it. Maybe the real question isn't whether sound exists in space, but whether sound is something that exists independently, or something that requires a listener to become real. And maybe the answer is that sound lives in the space between those two definitions. It's both the wave and the hearing, both the physics and the experience. Remove either one, and you're left with something incomplete, a vibration without perception, or perception without a source. Sound, in other words, is relational. It exists in the connection between the vibrating object and the perceiving being. It's not just in the air, and it's not just in the ear. It's in the relationship between them. You don't have to do anything with this knowledge. You don't have to change your life or see the world differently tomorrow. This isn't a lesson with a test at the end. It's just an invitation to be aware, even for a moment, of the extraordinary conditions that allow you to hear anything at all. The silence of space isn't a tragedy. It's not a failure of the universe. It's just the baseline, the default state of existence. And against that baseline, sound, our sound here on Earth, is an anomaly, a deviation, a pocket of possibility that exists only because a planet happened to form at the right distance from a star, with the right mix of elements, with enough gravity to hold an atmosphere, but not so much that the atmosphere crushes everything beneath it. We won the cosmic lottery, not just for life, but for sound, for the ability to hear each other, to communicate across distances, to sing, to speak, to listen, and you are here in this moment, experiencing that. Not thinking about it, not analyzing it, just being in it. Breathing the air that carries sound. Hearing the small, quiet noises of a world at rest. Feeling the weight of your body sinking into the mattress, held by gravity, anchored to a planet that spins through the silence at thousands of kilometers per hour. And yet, you don't feel the motion. You only feel the stillness. The universe doesn't need you to understand it. It doesn't need your attention or your gratitude. It continues regardless, indifferent, patient, vast, beyond comprehension. But you're part of it anyway, a small temporary part. Yes, a brief flicker of awareness in an ocean of time, but a part nonetheless. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's more than enough. Because in this moment, right now, you exist. You breathe, you hear. You are aware of the silence beyond the atmosphere and the sound within it. You are a listening thing in a mostly silent universe. And that, somehow, is extraordinary. The stars don't know you're here. The void doesn't acknowledge your presence. But the air does. The air carries your voice, your breath, your heartbeat. It connects you to every other sound being on this planet. To every human who has ever listened to the rain, or spoken a word, or heard music, and felt something shift inside them. You are part of the web, the invisible acoustic web that ties all of us together, that makes communication possible, that allows us to reach across the distance between one mind and another, and say, I'm here. I hear you. You're not alone. And maybe that's what sound has always been about. Not just information, not just survival, but connection. Proof that the world is alive, that others are near, that the silence, however vast, hasn't swallowed everything. Not yet. Not here. Not while there's still air to carry the wave, and ears to receive it, and minds to make meaning from the trembling of molecules. So let yourself rest now. Let the thoughts drift. Let the questions dissolve like mist in the morning sun. The universe will still be there when you wake, silent and spinning, patient and vast, and you will still be here in this small pocket of sound, listening, breathing, and alive.